Good afternoon, everyone. Small correction there. I'm actually Theo. Thomas had influenza and had to stay in Munich. So I'm hoping I'm going to make this entertaining for you. Actually, when I walked here, I walked into the wrong building. And I noticed, the first thing I said to my co-founder, Eric, is, I wish GeoNet had an antenna up here. And that's a perfect example, what you have just described, of a DePIN creating real world value. And I guess the argument I'm going to be making today, I don't want to shield my project. I want to really create a vision for you to see how these commodity-based DePINs can bring hundreds of millions of users into these protocols and essentially help leverage each other. So I imagine, it's not a hardware versus software kind of argument I'm going to be making, because if we have many, many users, hopefully those can convert back to GeoNet and vice versa. I am going to give you, though, a little bit of context on what we do so that you know what Silencio is all about. So what problem are we targeting today? By 2050, and these are very hard facts, we're going to have nearly 70% of the population living in urbanized areas. This means that 1 in 4 individuals is actually going to be suffering from hearing problems. And this creates a situation in which we need to create hyper-local insights to create more livable cities of the future. And this is where Silencio initially is coming in with a very novel data set, in which we have created a very fun and gamified, free-to-use mobile app for anyone to join and to deliver hyperlocal readings on their surroundings and create these insights across the world. And it's a great impact we're seeing. So far to date, since we launched over a year and a half ago, we have over 300,000 users. Our app is open more than 1 million times a day. And we're currently mapping the size of Paris every day. So this is real data being created on a daily basis. And what we want to focus on very strongly is the utility side of things. And I think this is one thing that perhaps we DePINs forget. It's not all about the solution, but also the utility for the users. So why would people use your protocol regardless if they get rewards or not? And this is what we're also targeting with our product. We want to appeal to a Web2 audience that doesn't care about rewards as well. That comes in because they can select one of nearly 7 million venue check-ins worldwide, identify how loud it is, and go into those places accordingly. We see millions of these uploads being delivered on a daily basis. And the beauty of these software-based DePINs is that you can iterate really, really fast. You can create new expanding data sets as your own, essentially the smartphone market. You're tapping into 7 billion devices, right? And so one of these new data sets that we're launching, it's a B2G product, which is noise complaints. Only in New York City alone, we have 5,000 complaints a day. And yeah, loud city. And with this, we want to create the insights for governments to understand where it is consistently loud and take according actions. And that's also very important. What do you do with the data? Do you take the actions? Because what we're creating is the insights, and then the action part is extremely important. Rounding up, we have a very interesting combination at Silencio. And something that I often tell people is, noise level data has been mapped with smartphones ever since the first Motorola's were around. This isn't something that Silencio invented, but we did turbocharge it. We brought in, the industry experts that were mapping noise level data using smartphones already. In New York, for example, we're working with an NYU assistant professor who's been mapping out noise across New York City. And we said, let's infuse the DePIN model and let's see if we can create the biggest DePIN network out there. And today, that seems to be the case already. So, democratizing smartphone data, I think for me, it's really the fundamental of how these DePINs can reach mass adoption by bringing many, many users, by focusing on utility and really solving a real world problem through blockchain. We've seen, GeoNet, and I think I'm not opposed to hardware. I think they make sense for very specific use cases. They have their, they have surely their upsides, and they also have their challenges. So do we. And this is something I'm going to be digging into a little bit now. But essentially, this software DePINs, we're seeing many of them being popped up. But the beauty is, as you own a vertical, and we started off with noise, you can expand into many other data sets and tap into huge existing markets as well as the product matures. One thing to do is focus on strong gamification for users to, want to interact, want to come back. It's super tough competing out there against all these apps, especially if you think about TikTok and Instagram and so on. So one core thing that we have to do is to reduce the friction of daily participation. This means that we have to create passive ways for people to come back. We have to focus on the real user utility, like the venue check-in already today. So imagine before you booked your hotel here in Singapore, in my first night, actually, I ended up staying in a very loud area. I don't have the coverage yet here, but in the future, I would have avoided it by having this data integrated into, let's say, bookings or Airbnb. I think there was a refresh problem with the PowerPoint, but I'm just going to skip over to this. So I'm going to challenge some of these assumptions I'm making as well. I did say, there's 7 billion smartphones, but essentially there's also 50 billion IoT devices, many of which can be integrated within the Silencio network. And you have ultimately a situation that you can create extremely profitable companies because you have no CapEx and you have a very low OpEx. And so you create very lean organization, fast-moving organizations that can iterate very, very fast. And you don't have supply chain issues. So imagine until you get a network on hardware that is commercially viable, and this was the situation with Helium, I suppose, at the beginning, that takes time. And we know that this industry is not known for its patience. And so we have to really think, how can we create networks in certain areas that are commercially interesting? And one argument for the software-based DePINs is that through dynamic rewards, you incentivize areas of higher commercial interest for you than, in the middle of nowhere where that data might not be adding any value to the protocol. The weaknesses, hardware, as I said, makes sense. And obviously, smartphones are not going to be as accurate as a professional DBA device, but we focus on the rule of large numbers. This is including a lot of data and through that identifying trends. And then obviously you got the outliers. And as the more data you get in, the more of a conclusive insights you can derive. And one side is that obviously you need a lot of high active users participating, especially with our data product of noise. Noise is constantly changing. And so it might have been loud in that very moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always loud there. If, however, that trend persists, then you know what the average soundscape of that area can be. Having that higher flexibility means, you can iterate faster. You have so many so many sensors in your smartphone. Just think about this smartphone you have today versus the smartphone you had 10 years ago, and potentially the smartphone you're going to have in 10 years from now. And so owning 100 million users down the line, that's your real asset as a software-based DePIN. You can gamify any new data set, reward users for that value, and through that create a lot of data products. Some of the threats. Everywhere where there's money to be made, there's going to be cheaters. We know that. So that means that continuous spoofers and cheaters are in the system. You have to create systems to identify those. For example, we have a very simple one, but if someone's driving around with their car, that data is not going to be useful for us on the street. So, speed limits are one thing that we do there. And there's a lot of different filters to identify abnormal human behavior that is, computed for the system. And I think that that is the biggest threats for these commodity-based DePINs is essentially dirty data. You have, obviously, you're exposed to Apple and Android. Yeah, if they tomorrow change their terms and conditions, you have to be able to deal with that and adapt accordingly. And the low barriers to entry means that there's going to be a ton of DePINs out there tomorrow that tap into smartphones. So for me, it's going to be a winner-takes-all market. So the more you can position yourself with the network effects at the beginning, the better you're going to have of a chance of being that DePIN that people want to use. Because you're not going to be using 10 different protocols in your phone. You're going to get tired of that, which leads me to the new shiny thing problem. So there's always going to be something that excites people more. There's always going to be something new that comes up, and you have to stay relevant. And through that, you have to create ways for people to participate passively. You can't expect for people to come in 1 million times into the app every day. That might be currently the situation, but you have to find ways for people to continuously deliver data to the protocol. So with that said, I'm going to give it up to the audience and any questions that you have.
Great, thank you. Do we have questions? Yes, Mike, again.
Yeah, I'm a person that really hates noise, so I love your idea. So can you classify the sounds, like the lawnmowers, or if I'm looking for a new house, figure out, is this a place where there's, how close are we to having something a person could actually use for some different daily tasks to avoid noise?
Yeah, exactly. So that's an excellent point. Today, we're only measuring decibels, and we are working, and that is thankfully to the scientific team we have. Through frequencies, you can also identify the noise sources, and through that say if it's a lawnmower or if it's an airplane, if it's street music, whatever, and through that start clustering noises accordingly. And that's going to be essential to create those insights as well in a much more deeper and immersive level.
Question, yes, Rob.
Now, full disclosure, this may qualify as a softball because I think I already know the answer. But in your presentation, you talked about noise being sort of the first data set, and then you talked about the phones have lots of different sensors. So can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the other data sets that you think Silencio will be able to collect over time that, will open up new markets and new opportunities for you?
Absolutely. So one data set that I think I'm very excited about is point of interest data. Essentially, every time that you go to a place and you say it's at Starbucks across, that information is being pulled by an API provider. And that pull is very expensive. Sometimes, with Google's case, it costs a cent. So imagine every day the massive value generated by Google just alone on those API calls for those locations. We want to create our own base in which we allow people to create that venue. And essentially, we already have 7 million locations. There's over 250 million locations worldwide where today you can check in. Many more locations don't even exist on Google Maps. And so if we create that API database for people to access, and let's say I tell the community, hey, every time that call is being retrieved, half of that goes to you, for the sake of the argument, it's going to be a massive incentive for people to be the first one to create all those venue check-ins and then, get those royalties and perpetuity into the future. That's one data set I think that taps into a very clear value proposition. Then you have, wireless network or cell phone coverage data, also for cell phone companies to understand where to expand their coverage next. Health data and so on as the spectrum progresses.
Terrific. Any more questions? All right, round of applause, please. Thank you very much.